When I won $3 million in the lottery, my sister told everyone, "Don't worry, she's too dumb to handle that kind of money." When I checked her phone, I saw messages with my mom plotting to have me declared mentally unfit. I cried. Then I sued them both and won custody of their secret inheritance. I donated every cent they wanted. I'm Sheila Monroe, and I never imagined my life would turn into something that people read about. But here I am. A simple woman who never sought drama, became the center of a storm because of greed, family greed. I grew up in a little suburb outside of Richmond, Virginia. Nothing fancy, just rows of aging brick houses, oak trees lining cracked sidewalks, and neighbors who knew too much about each other's business. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't well off either. My father, Gregory, was a government clerk, the kind of job you stick with for the pension, and my mother, Susan, did volunteer work that she used as social currency at church luncheons. But the real star of our family was always my older sister, Veronica. Tall, poised, with the kind of beauty that earned her constant attention even when we were kids. Teachers adored her. Relatives fawned over her. Every success she achieved only reinforced what everyone around me quietly believed, that I was the other one. The quiet one. The plain one. The one who was kind-hearted but not as gifted. Veronica got scholarships, a prestigious degree, and married Stuart, who was well on his way to becoming a big player in Richmond's real estate market. Their wedding was this huge ordeal at a vineyard in Charlottesville. I remember standing there, wearing a bridesmaid dress that cost me nearly a month's salary, smiling for pictures, all while feeling completely invisible. I, on the other hand, never left Richmond. I worked at the local animal shelter. Nothing glamorous, but I loved it. I had my small rented duplex, my rescue cat Olive, and my quiet life. And honestly, I was content. That is until one Thursday that changed everything. It was raining that day, and I had stopped at the Shell gas station by Patterson Avenue on my way home from work. I was tired. My uniform smelled like wet dogs. The guy at the counter, Rick, was chatting with a customer about lottery tickets. On impulse, I grabbed one of the colorful scratch-offs by the register. It was a $20 one. Normally, I wouldn't have spent that kind of money on a lottery ticket, but I don't know, something nudged me. I scratched it in my car. 3 matching 7s. At first, I didn't even understand what I was looking at. My hands were shaking as I walked back inside to have Rick verify it. His eyes went wide. Jesus, Sheila. You just hit $3 million. Everything after that felt like a blur. Calls to the lottery office. Appointments with officials. Endless paperwork. And then, most importantly, the decision to hire a lawyer. That's where Harold came in. Harold Whitaker was older, sharp, but with this grandfatherly calm. He was the first person who looked at me not like I was some idiot who stumbled into fortune, but like someone who needed protection. His first advice? Do not tell anyone you won until you're ready. People change when money enters the picture. He wasn't lying. For a week, I lived in secret with my win. But eventually, I felt like I owed it to my family to tell them. We weren't close exactly, but we were family. So I invited them over for dinner at my little duplex. Veronica arrived in her Mercedes, wearing a fitted blazer and heels I could never afford even after winning. My mother followed, bringing a store-bought pie and a practiced smile. I served them spaghetti, something simple because my stomach was already in knots. And after a few glasses of wine, I finally said it. I won the lottery, $3 million. The room went quiet. I watched their faces, trying to read them. My mother was the first to speak. Oh, my God. Sheila, that's incredible. Veronica smiled, but I noticed her knuckles go white as she gripped her wine glass. Wow, Sheila. That's unexpected. Then came the questions. Have you spoken to a financial advisor yet? Do you know how much taxes will eat into that? Do you have a plan for investing? At first, I thought it was genuine concern. But there was something patronizing in their tone, like I couldn't possibly manage it on my own. Veronica even brought up the fact that I'd struggled with anxiety in the past, suggesting, maybe it's a bit overwhelming for you, you know? It's a lot of responsibility. I brushed it off. But the next few days, things started to get weird. My mom started calling me daily, hinting at this wonderful financial planner she knew through one of her friends at church, someone who works with people who win big like you. Veronica would text me constantly, offering to help me sort through the complicated stuff. I played dumb. I smiled. I thanked them for their help. But my gut told me something was off. And then came the whispers. I was at the grocery store one afternoon, and I heard two women from my mom's church chatting near the produce section. Poor Sheila. I hear her sister's helping manage the money. It's good though, she was never that sharp. She's lucky she's got Veronica looking out for her. That night, I sat in my kitchen, Olive purring beside me, turning everything over in my mind. I wasn't stupid. I'd been underestimated my whole life, but I wasn't stupid. Then came the family dinner. The one where Veronica made her fatal mistake. We had gathered again at my place. My mother had brought her famous lasagna. Veronica was on her phone constantly, texting someone between bites. Then she left her phone on the kitchen counter when she went to the bathroom. That's when my curiosity got the better of me. A message notification lit up. Mom, make sure she signs the forms this weekend. Forms? My stomach flipped. I unlocked the phone, feeling like a criminal, but knowing I needed to know. What I found made me sick. Mom, once the psychiatrist signs off, the judge won't question it. Veronica, Stewart says the trust documents are ready. As soon as she's declared mentally incompetent, we move the funds. They were planning to have me declared mentally unfit. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. It wasn't just greed. This was betrayal. This was premeditated. They were going to strip me of everything, legally. They even had a psychiatrist lined up. Dr. Benson. The same doctor I saw years ago for anxiety when I broke up with my first serious boyfriend. I carefully placed the phone back where Veronica had left it. Forced myself to sit through the rest of dinner like nothing was wrong. My heart was hammering the entire time. That night, I didn't sleep. I called Harold first thing in the morning. When I told him everything, he didn't react with surprise. I was afraid of something like this, he said calmly. But we've got them now. Harold got to work immediately. First, we retrieved Veronica's full phone backup. Then he hired a private investigator. Stewart, it turned out, was drowning in debt. His real estate ventures had soured, and the lottery money was their Hail Mary. But Harold found something even more disturbing. Years ago, my great-aunt Margaret, who lived quietly in Vermont, had passed away. She'd left behind a sizable inheritance, $1.2 million, meant to be split between me and Veronica. My mother and sister had conspired back then to forge documents, claiming I had waived my inheritance due to emotional instability. They'd already stolen from me once. Now, with hard evidence in hand, Harold filed a civil suit. But this wasn't just civil. What they had done, forging legal documents, conspiring to have me declared mentally unfit, bordered on criminal. We involved the district attorney's office. The storm was coming. And they never saw it. The moment they were served was almost satisfying. Veronica called me in a panic, screaming that I was ruining the family. My mother left me sobbing voicemails about how I was tearing us apart. Suddenly, all their talk about protecting me vanished. The court proceedings dragged on for months. I had to relive every humiliating thing they ever said about me, in court, in front of strangers. They tried to argue that I'd always struggled with mental health, that they were only trying to shield me from making bad financial decisions. They painted me as unstable. But Harold was brilliant. He read their text messages aloud in court. The judge's face hardened with each one. By the time we got to the forged inheritance documents from my Aunt Margaret's estate, it was over. Veronica turned pale. My mother cried in court. Stewart tried to deny involvement, but the financial records spoke for themselves. In the end, the judge ruled decisively in my favor. They lost everything. But it wasn't over yet. After the judge slammed down that gavel, there was this odd silence that stretched out in the courtroom. You'd think I'd feel triumphant, but I didn't. Not yet. Not when I could still feel the way my mother looked at me with those pitiful, teary eyes like I was the one who had betrayed them. Not when I could still hear Veronica's voice in my head from all those years, you wouldn't understand, Sheila. You're just different. The press got hold of it quickly. Small town, big scandal. Local lottery winner sues own family for fraud was plastered everywhere, in print, on TV, on the local radio. I tried to keep my head down, But every time I went to the grocery store or filled my tank at that same Shell station, people would glance at me like I was some exotic animal they'd read about. And the whispers were everywhere now. Can you believe her sister tried to have her committed? Her own mother, too. Disgusting. Sheila always seemed so sweet. They were probably jealous from the start. Of course, these were the same people who, just weeks earlier, had been gossiping about how I wasn't smart enough to handle my winnings. Harold wasn't done yet either. Once the civil case was closed, he immediately began working with the DA's office. There were charges, serious ones. Conspiracy to defraud. Forgery. Attempted abuse of legal guardianship laws. Stewart, being up to his neck in fraudulent real estate schemes, got additional federal charges too. I never knew the system moved so slowly, but Harold said we had to be patient. Let them sweat, he'd say. They've spent their whole lives thinking they were smarter than everyone else. They need time to realize they aren't. Meanwhile, Veronica's world started to crumble. Stewart's brokerage collapsed under the investigation. Their home in the posh West Hampton neighborhood went into foreclosure. Their fancy friends stopped calling. It turned out nobody wanted to stay friends with people involved in fraud, especially when the scandal made the Richmond Times-Dispatch front page. My mother, however, was a different kind of collapse. She tried to play victim everywhere she went. She told anyone who would listen that she had only been trying to protect her emotionally fragile daughter. She showed up at church weeping. She tried to get the pastor to intervene. I started receiving letters from mutual friends and family, distant cousins, old family friends, most of them trying to guilt me. Sheila, I know your mother made mistakes, but she's still your mother. You only have one family. Don't let money tear you apart. I ignored every one of them. Harold told me to stay quiet, stay dignified. And that's what I did. But inside? Oh, inside I was burning. Because the thing was, it was never really about the money. Not for me. It was about every single time they made me feel small. Every time I was overlooked. Every birthday where my parents were too busy because Veronica had something important going on. Every time my concerns were brushed aside with a smile and a patronizing pat on the hand. And now they wanted me to forgive? No. About a month after the trial, I got an unexpected knock at my door. It was late afternoon. Olive hissed softly and darted behind the couch. I opened it to find Veronica standing there. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked human. For the first time in years. Sheila, she whispered. Please. I stood there, gripping the doorframe. Please, she continued, we never meant for it to go that far. Mom. Mom was the one pushing it. Stewart was desperate. We were scared. Her voice cracked. I miss my sister. I stared at her, feeling that familiar blend of disgust and sadness well up. For years, I would have given anything to hear her say she missed me. But now? Now it was hollow. You miss your sister? I said quietly. The one you tried to have declared mentally incompetent? The one you wanted locked up just so you could steal from her? Tears welled in her eyes. We were trying to fix things, Sheila. You don't understand how much pressure we were under. I let out a bitter laugh. You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how you could do that to your own family. But you will understand something, you're not welcome here. Not anymore. I gently closed the door in her face. She didn't knock again. Weeks turned into months. The criminal proceedings dragged on. Harold handled most of it, but I had to testify a few more times. Sitting in the same room as my mother and sister was nauseating, but I forced myself to remain calm. Harold said every moment I stayed collected only strengthened my position. Veronica pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding prison, though she was now burdened with hefty restitution payments and years of probation. Stewart wasn't so lucky, he faced prison time for the financial crimes tied to his brokerage. My mother managed to weasel her way into a plea deal by throwing Stewart under the bus, but the public shame was irreversible. The volunteer circles at her church distanced themselves quickly. The woman who used to brag about her social standing couldn't even show her face at Sunday service anymore. And yet, even through all of it, I sometimes caught myself grieving. Not for the money or the legal mess, but for the family I thought I had. For the naive version of myself who once thought love was unconditional. I went to therapy during that time. Real therapy. Not some quack my mother or Veronica tried to push me toward. My therapist, Dr. Stein, helped me understand that grieving the idea of family is its own process. You're mourning an illusion, Dr. Stein said. The real family you had never valued you. But the hope for that family? That's what you're letting go of. But life continued. And little by little, I rebuilt. My duplex was modest but peaceful. I kept volunteering at the shelter part-time, even increased my donations there anonymously. Olive remained my constant companion, growing lazier by the day. I had a few real friends, people who saw me not as the lottery winner, but as Sheila. And Harold, he became more than just my lawyer. He became my rock. We shared coffee regularly at a little cafe down the street. He'd update me on the slow trickle of legal proceedings, but often we just talked about books or the news. One afternoon, after giving me an update on Stuart's sentencing, Harold leaned back in his chair, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. You know, he said softly, most people in your position would have settled, kept the family peace, and tried to avoid airing dirty laundry. But you stood up for yourself. That takes real strength. I gave a small smile, but my eyes stung. I didn't feel strong. I felt angry. And tired. And betrayed. That's usually what real strength feels like, he said. Harold's words stuck with me for days after that conversation. I never saw myself as someone strong. If anything, I spent most of my life shrinking myself to fit into spaces where my family allowed me to exist. But now? Now I have carved out my own space. And they hated me for it. But it wasn't just about them anymore. The lawsuit, the trial, they had triggered something bigger inside me. Something that had been buried for years. I started paying closer attention to the shelter, noticing how often people came in with heartbreaking stories. An elderly woman trying to surrender her cat because she couldn't afford food for both herself and her pet. A single mother dropping off a dog she could no longer keep because she'd lost her job. I started writing anonymous checks. Quiet donations. Harold helped me set up a private fund so I could support these people discreetly. I didn't want recognition. I just didn't want anyone else to feel as alone as I once had. Meanwhile, the fallout from my family's collapse continued to ripple through town. Richmond isn't a big place. Everybody eventually hears everything. Old neighbors who used to barely acknowledge me were now full of awkward smiles and faux concern. Hope you're doing okay, Sheila. Must be hard, all that drama. I gave polite nods but never invited further conversation. I knew what they really wanted, the gossip. One afternoon, while walking out of the local pharmacy, I ran into Mrs. Everett, one of my mother's oldest friends from church. Sheila, she said with her head tilted sympathetically, I hope you're finding peace after everything that's happened. You know, your mother isn't doing well. She's very lost. I held my breath for a moment, then calmly replied, she's living with the consequences of her choices. Just like the rest of us. Mrs. Everett gave me a small nod but couldn't quite meet my eyes after that. I walked away with my head held high, my heart pounding, a mix of sadness and something almost like pride. Veronica tried to reach out again about 6 months later. This time it wasn't a surprise visit but a letter, delivered to my mailbox in her neat, careful handwriting. I recognized it instantly. My hands hesitated before opening it. Dear Sheila, I know you hate me. You probably always will. And maybe I deserve that. I've lost everything. Stuart, the house, our friends. And now I can barely look at myself in the mirror. I know it sounds hollow now, but I truly thought I was protecting you. We made mistakes, horrible mistakes. But you're my sister. And I hope someday, maybe even years from now, you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I read the letter twice. There were no apologies for what she did. Just regret that she had lost everything. Regret that her carefully constructed world had fallen apart. But no true ownership of her choices. No acknowledgement of the calculated cruelty it took to plot against her own sister. I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't throw it away, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder. People show you who they really are when money's on the table. Meanwhile, my mother's situation was unraveling in its own humiliating way. After her social circles abandoned her, She sold their family home, the one I grew up in, to cover her legal fees. A young couple bought it and started renovating immediately. The towering oak trees my father had planted decades ago were cut down within a month. For some strange reason, I drove past the house one evening. The porch lights were on, but everything else looked unfamiliar. The new owners had painted the brick white, installed modern black window frames. The home I had known all my life was gone. Stripped. Rebuilt. And oddly, it brought me a strange comfort. Like the final threads of that old life were finally snapping. There was no going back. One evening, Harold invited me to a charity gala downtown, a small fundraiser for legal aid services. Normally, I avoided public events now, but he gently insisted. "It'll be good for you," he said with a kind smile. "You've done more good with your money than most people ever do. Let a few people see that." I reluctantly agreed. The gala was held in a historic mansion-turned-event space in downtown Richmond. Crystal chandeliers, polished wood floors, and waiters floating around with trays of champagne and tiny hors d'oeuvres that I couldn't even pronounce. As I stood near the back, quietly observing, a woman approached me. She was tall, confident, middle-aged with warm eyes. "You must be Sheila Monroe," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Julia Harper. I run the legal fund this event supports. I've heard quite a bit about you." I shook her hand, feeling slightly self-conscious. "Hopefully not everything you've heard," I said with a half-smile. She laughed gently. "Only the good parts. You've been very generous, anonymously, I know. But it's not just the money that impresses me. It's what you endured. And how you chose to handle it." I didn't know how to respond, so I nodded awkwardly. I wasn't used to people seeing me as anything but the lottery girl whose family tried to screw her over. But Julia continued, "If you ever want to get involved more directly, we could use someone like you. Someone who understands how people get taken advantage of. Someone who's lived through it." Her words surprised me. I'd never thought about being more involved. But that night, for the first time in months, a different kind of feeling bubbled up inside me: purpose. Not revenge. Not survival. Purpose. And while my life slowly shifted towards something meaningful, my mother's and sister's lives remained in freefall. Veronica moved into a tiny apartment outside the city, working some low-paying admin job she was wildly overqualified for. Stuart was still awaiting his full sentencing. My mother ended up living with a distant cousin out in Chesterfield, someone she used to gossip about behind their back. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every now and then, I'd hear about another door closing for them. Veronica being rejected for jobs because of her record. My mother was turned away from events she once chaired. And while part of me still felt a small pang of pity, because old habits die hard, I mostly felt relief. Relief that I was free of them. Relief that they finally had to sit in the ruins they created. Months continued to roll by, and my life kept changing in ways I never expected. I accepted Julia's offer and began volunteering with the legal aid group. It felt good, purposeful. I was helping people who, like me, were victims of family exploitation, fraud, and financial abuse. Sitting across from these women, some young, some elderly, I saw versions of myself in all of them. I knew what it felt like to be blindsided by people you trusted most. Every time I left the office, I felt lighter. Stronger. I wasn't just the girl who won the lottery anymore. I had taken control of my narrative. But while I was building something new, my mother and Veronica continued sliding downward. The final blow didn't come from me, not directly. Life simply kept chipping away at them, as it often does with people who built everything on lies. Stuart was officially sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for real estate fraud and wire fraud. His assets were seized. The house in West Hampton was long gone. His brokerage license was permanently revoked. The life he and Veronica had curated with such smug perfection was officially obliterated. My mother, after burning every social bridge she had, became more desperate. She started showing up at the shelter where I volunteered. Not to adopt or help, but to try and run into me, like she was still entitled to my time. One chilly Saturday morning, she walked through the front door wearing her carefully rehearsed fragile expression, like we were just estranged family members due for a reunion. "Sheila," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, can we talk? Just for a moment?" I was standing behind the intake desk, sorting through files. Without looking up, I said, "I'm working, Susan." Her lip trembled. You're still angry. I understand that. But I'm your mother. We only wanted to help you. I finally looked up. Calm, steady. The anger I once had was gone, replaced by a kind of cold clarity. No, you wanted to help yourselves. And you were willing to ruin my life to do it. Around us, the staff was watching, pretending not to listen. My mother, once the grand social queen, now reduced to begging for scraps of forgiveness in a public lobby. She tried one last time. Maybe you'll feel differently in time. I simply shook my head. Maybe you'll feel differently when you understand what it's like to have no one you can trust. I motioned for one of the volunteers to take over while I stepped away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. That, in itself, was victory. But my true revenge, the satisfying one, wasn't that she was humiliated. It was how I used what they had tried to steal from me. You see, after Harold and I finalized all the legal settlements, I found myself sitting on not only my original $3 million winnings but also the full inheritance they had tried to steal from Aunt Margaret. Altogether, I had enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, but that never felt right. That money, especially Aunt Margaret's money, carried poison in it. So, I made a decision. With Harold's help, I created the Margaret Monroe Foundation, named not after myself, but after the great aunt who had intended that money for both of us. The foundation was established to support victims of family financial exploitation, particularly focusing on women who had suffered through manipulative guardianships, conservatorship, and abusive family financial control, exactly like what my own mother and sister tried to pull on me. It wasn't some small side charity. With Harold's network, Julia's legal contacts, and the weight of my story behind it, we got media coverage. We secured more donors. Lawyers began offering pro bono services. Within a year, the foundation was fully operational. I remember standing in front of a packed community center during the launch event, delivering a short speech I had written and rewritten a dozen times. There are people in this world who will betray you the moment they see an opportunity. Sometimes, they're strangers. Sometimes, they're the people you share your childhood with. But betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do next. The crowd applauded. Reporters took notes. Cameras flashed. In the back of the room, standing near the exit, was my mother. She had snuck in quietly. Alone. Watching. Her face was pale, her lips thin and tight. Veronica wasn't there. She was likely too humiliated, too exposed. Word had gotten around about the foundation. People knew exactly why it existed. And in that moment, I felt no hate for my mother. Only power. A kind of justice they would never escape. They couldn't touch me anymore. But more importantly, they couldn't touch anyone else like me either. The ultimate revenge wasn't watching them lose everything. It wasn't the lawsuits or the legal victories or their social ruin. The ultimate revenge was turning every dollar they tried to steal into something bigger than their small, pathetic ambitions. Their legacy became my legacy. Not as a victim, but as someone who built something good from their darkness. Now, years later, I still live in my little duplex with Olive, who is older, a bit grumpier, but still loyal. I have more than enough money, but I live simply. My days are filled with real work, meaningful work. The foundation continues to grow. We've helped dozens of women win back their freedom from abusive families, shady conservatorship, and predatory financial control. As for my mother and Veronica, they exist in the shadows of Richmond now. Stripped of reputation. Shunned by former friends. Whispered about at grocery stores, but for very different reasons than they once were. And that? That is enough. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes, it's about building a life they can never poison again.